Now, a woman who'd left her shape entirely to nature, with luck, might look like this. But it's only occasionally in real life that shapes are left to nature, and only occasionally that nature produces a human goddess. Theoretically, these classical beauties are admired devotedly by each new generation, but in practice, a little distortion is almost always preferred. If it's not tight lacing, then it may be square shoulders. This was the look all women strove for throughout the Second World War. If it's not square shoulders, perhaps it's the sloping shoulders so beloved by the early Victorians, with the kind of curved chest that's been called a monobosom. Sometimes the bosom was placed extravagantly high, as in the high-waisted early 1800s. And sometimes it was made to look decidedly low, as in the blouse of 1902 and thereabouts. At another time, it was the correct thing to pretend that one had no bosom at all, while in the middle of the present century, there was inflation in more senses than one. This fashionable figure is not much nearer to nature than its opposite, the boyish look of the 1920s. That is to say, if this is anything to go by. Yet between the 1920s and the 1940s, there were the 1930s, when for nearly 10 years, the figure was on the verge of being quite natural. The innovation of cutting the whole dress on the cross meant that feminine clothes could follow the lines of the real human body beneath more closely than had been possible for hundreds of years. The muslin dresses of Napoleon's time, being cut on the straight, couldn't achieve anything like the same clinging effect. And in the 1930s, the back décolletage was much more pronounced than had ever been seen before in all the history of fashion. A back cut as low as this was thought amazingly daring in 1806. Here's one of the 1930s daytime styles. It's a period that's due for rediscovery. Every fashion, of course, comes to seem amusing and interesting when sufficient time has gone by. What will be revived first, the bias cut, the clinging lines, the natural figure free from all exaggeration? Perhaps the fancy gauntlets, or the short-looking high-heeled shoes, or the characteristic hat, deliberately a little insane. There's always a certain irresponsibility about hats, and in the 1930s it was more than usually evident. What whiskers and moustaches do for men, makeup does for women. If the figure in the 1930s was natural, the face decidedly wasn't. Not since the 18th century had there been so much visible artifice as there was throughout the 1930s. Elaborate courses of treatment from beauty specialists began to seem almost a necessity. Eyebrows were plucked and sometimes penciled on again at a quite different angle. Eyelids were heavily shaded. Rouge on lips and cheeks had either a bluish or an orange tinge. Foundation lotions and creams were used by more or less everyone, and hair dye was no longer a dark or light secret. Makeup had been permissible, just permissible, in the First World War. It was widely accepted in the 1920s and an absolute necessity from the 1930s onwards. How long will it remain so? Not forever. The nature of fashion is such that it must change. But we may be sure that even if cosmetics as we know them cease to be in vogue, other artifices will come to take their place. Artifice of some kind is always à la mode. Powder and patches, paint and pomatum. False color. False curls. False contours. artificial posture. And yet, what is a poor human being to do, seeing that a certain amount of showing off is nature's own contrivance? For men as well as women, even if it's only showing what can be done with whiskers. The peacock, it must be admitted, is a male bird. Yes, the peacock is a male bird. Who'd have thought it?